We are now 1 month away from the NBA draft, one of my favorite times of year in the NBA, which is, if you're a Bulls fan, it's one of the few things you get to look forward to in the offseason. But given we are inching closer and closer to draft night, we've got player stocks rising and falling on mock draft boards coming out of the combine. That means we got to do another video on potential draft prospects for the Bulls with the number 12 pick. I did one of these a week ago covering 4 prospects that I believe would be a great fit for the Bulls should they be available when the Bulls are on the clock. And I mentioned that I would do another one on some additional prospects that I like, their strengths and weaknesses. And yes, I will do a video later on players that I would actually prefer the Bulls avoid with the 12th pick. So in this video, we'll cover 4 additional draft prospects that are slated to go around the range where the Bulls will be selecting, and I would love to hear your guys' thoughts on these as well. So what's going on, everyone? You were listening to Bulls Central here. Hope you're all doing well. Also, be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. It really does help me out greatly, and especially in a time like this during the offseason to keep the algorithm going. I really do appreciate it. Now, just like I called out in my last draft prospects video, I'm only going to be covering players that are realistically, or maybe somewhat unrealistic, but realistic enough, going to still be available at number 12. And yes, for the purpose of this video, we're going to assume the Bulls keep that pick and do not trade up in the draft for a higher selection, though it is possible the Bulls could look to move up on draft night, but we'll save that for now. And the guy I want to start with, who's been receiving a lot of praise from the media and executives coming out of the combine, particularly members of the media, the Bulls media, is Asad Newell, the big man freshman out of Georgia, whose stock has been rising from initially being slated to go in the middle of the first round to now being a lottery pick on most mock draft boards. What I like about Newell, and I mean aside from the fact that he fits a position of need for the Bulls, given he can play the 4 or 5, but he's a big-time hustle player and energy guy. If you guys know me, I am a sucker for guys who give it their all on the court, even if they're not the most skilled. It's why I love guys like Joakim Noah and Alex Caruso. Not only that, he's incredibly athletic, very fluid in the paint, big-time offensive rebounder, which the Bulls need, great footwork in the post and interior scoring. 19 years old, so like a lot of prospects in the draft, a lot of upside with this kid. I think the biggest question mark, and could really mean the difference in him being a high-level player versus maybe a nice role player, is his shooting. He can shoot it for a big man. The problem is he did not shoot it well in his lone season in college at 29%. He did shoot it well in high school, though, at over 41%. Very similar to what we saw from Modest Bucelis coming into the draft, and why a lot of people believe he fell all the way to 11 because of his questionable shooting. Shot it very well in high school, but was sub 30% in the G League Ignite. And Modest showed us why his shooting for the Ignite was a bit of an outlier, given he shot 36% from deep last season. If he can be an outside shooting threat combined with his finishing ability and paint touch, that is a big come up for the Bulls to get with the number 12 pick. And based on most recent mock draft boards, it is more likely than not he would still be available by the time the Bulls are set to make their selection. The next guy I've started to find more and more promising that has been quickly rising on mock boards, so much so that now I'm not even sure if he'll be available at number 12, is Noah Asenge. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing his name properly. I'm just going to call him Noah for the purposes of this video. But he plays professional basketball in France and has been turning heads. He's the second youngest player in the draft, only behind Cooper Flagg. He'll be 18 by the time the season starts. Another big, well, I don't know if I should call him a big. He's tall. He's 6'10", super lengthy. He probably fits more of being a wing. Another big-time athlete, hustle player, quick and great in transition. He can play on and off the ball in creating a shot or moving and scoring off screens, but then also he's shown a lot of promise on the defensive end, using his length to contest shots even if his man gets by him off the dribble. He's able to recover nicely. I mean, in a way, kind of reminds me of Modest Bucelis when you look at the build and the way he plays stylistically. This would be one of those big-time upside players who is going to be very raw coming into the NBA. Probably is going to need a couple of years to really be an impact player, which for that reason alone makes me think maybe the Bulls likely won't draft him, because they want those guys that are ready to start competing now and NBA ready from the jump. But I do think this would be a good fit from a positional standpoint, since we know the Bulls are going to need more front court players, especially if they do move on from Nikola Vucevic. Another guy that I've been hearing a ton about, and I know my guys over at CHGO were talking about this kid and how he could end up becoming the gem of the draft, and that's Cedric Coward. Now, it might be a stretch to be taking Coward at 12. I've rarely seen mock draft boards having him go as high as the lottery, so it is a player that if the Bulls are really eyeing, it might make sense to trade back in order to get him later on. But then of course you also run the risk of someone selecting him earlier when you could have just taken him with the 12th pick. But either way, I like Coward's maturity, his mindset, his work ethic. I mean, you understand more when you see that he's a bit more polished with better IQ and decision making, when you see that he's a bit older for a prospect in this draft. He's already 21, he'll be 22 by the time the season starts, 4-year college player out of Washington State, and you typically see this where you have an older 3 or 4-year college player. They go much later in the draft because the assumption is there likely isn't as much upside as someone who is 18 or 19 years old, because otherwise they would have made it to the league already, right? I don't really look at it that way though, because development isn't always linear. You can always have a great prospect come into the league who developed nicely in college and takes their learnings and experience and applies it to the NBA. But Coward is a big guard, like physically just a bulky dude, but he's a guard that can do a lot of things. He's great in the catch and shoot, but athletic in his ability to drive to the basket. I talked about his IQ. He's exceptionally good when it comes to off-ball defense and knowing where he needs to be on that end of the floor. The biggest question mark when it comes to Coward is that he's not a great ball handler, which you kind of need as a guard in this league. Yeah, you can play off the ball as a catch and shoot shooter, which he's proven he can do, but he's got to be able to tighten his handles and use his speed and athleticism to get to the cup more consistently. If he's able to do that, then we're getting somewhere where he's a viable option you can build upon for the future. Again, I absolutely think Coward will be on the board at number 12. The question is whether it would be a stretch to take him there, or does it make sense to trade back in the draft to get him later on while also getting some other assets in return. And then finally, the last prospect on this list, a player that has huge boom or bust potential in my opinion, and I've seen so many mixed reviews on this kid, but that is Igor Denham, the freshman out of BYU. The most common player comparison I've seen across the internet for this guy is Josh Giddey. And I mean, I get why, but I feel like it's also just kind of a lazy comparison simply because he's tall, he's a playmaking guard that isn't that athletic, doesn't shoot well, and he's white. That said, there are a lot of things to like about this kid, especially if he can develop some semblance of scoring consistency. He's a high IQ player, impeccable court vision with his ability to create for others. He's got pretty good handles, I would argue even better than Josh Giddey. He can get to the hoop and finish well, but he's also a pretty underrated defender. Like, his feel for the game is not only on offense, but also extends to the other side of the floor, which is great to see. Again, this is one of those boom or bust guys where if he's able to develop his scoring, if he's able to develop a jump shot from deep, then you got a high-level player that you can build with for the future who has all the intangibles that can make your offense run. But yeah, I mean, the biggest drawback here is he's very slim. He needs to put on some more muscle to be able to compete with the level of physicality at the NBA. He's pretty slow-footed overall, not that athletic, so his playmaking would really need to shine through to mask some of his other weaknesses if he wants to compete at the NBA level. Now, at the Combine, people were talking about how he was knocking down threes and showing off that stroke and saying, okay, looks like we don't need to be as concerned about this kid shooting like we saw in college. But to me, I'm never going to be that impressed seeing someone knock down threes consistently when they're wide open in shooting drills. I need to see it happen in 5-on-5 play. So anyway, those are some of my other draft prospects that I'm looking at, ones that I find intriguing heading into the draft for the Chicago Bulls. Like I mentioned, I'll also do a video on some prospects I'm hoping the Bulls will avoid, as I see some glaring concerns to their game or too much of a risk to take on. So be on the lookout for that next week. Hope you all enjoy your weekend. As always, be sure to subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.